Hello, I'm Kath Penaluna.
Hi, and I'm Andy Penaluna.
Which means we are in the Penaluna Palace.
It's time for another show from Colin Jones, the reasonable adventurer. Time for you to take another step towards creating your own opportunities for satisfaction.
And it is a huge welcome to episode 69. Yes, we are in Swansea, Wales, with Andy and Kath Penaluna in the Penaluna Palace. How are you guys?
Really
Pretty good, Cole? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, very good.
What have we been talking about that might be of interest to our millions of listeners?
Education, enterprise education, transformational learning.
Interesting, Andy. I sort of got the impression that Kath was going to be a bit shy, but she's hogging the show already.
Well, that's the way it works in this household, Cole.
Yeah.
And, my friends like you and friends out there on the podcast will know that now.
Yeah, but if it's a topic that you're passionate about, you will just leap in and talk about it. And that is one of the challenges of us enterprise educators. We really enjoy our topic and want to share.
Wow. She's fired up, isn't she?
She is fired up today, Cole, yeah. But I think it's this transformational thing that we've been picking up on a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the sort of the challenge is we're sort of getting increasingly caught up in a world where people are saying enterprise education, entrepreneurship education is a big thing, we need more of it, government policies have been directed towards it, and yet it seems to be everybody's chasing after a poster boy or girl that they can say, look at this person who got some venture capital funding and went off and did something that disrupted something in society. But that's not typically who we work with every day, is it?
Not on a daily basis. We don't know who we're going to work with or which students, what their backgrounds are, whether there's a thing on Twitter this morning about, is it for rich kids? Well, we deal with a lot of disadvantaged kids who are from backgrounds that make it quite tough, especially in our international work.
Yeah, and especially social capital. I mean, it's people who haven't necessarily got the networks and the influences from their family. I mean, we also have a number of people whose family have been involved in business or entrepreneurs themselves, and obviously then that has a real impact on the students.
And we were chatting about that today, weren't we? What's the logical expectation that students at age 20 could all just go off and start a business, when they may not have enough experience in an industry, when they may not have developed that social capital within an industry and understand how it actually, what's even happening, how does that space change? I'm not sure many students fully comprehend how something changes, yet they believe that they can enter that space and change it.
Well, arguably, this is one of the reasons why apprenticeships are high on the agenda at the moment.
Yeah.
Because people need to actually have that experience, really. To have done an academic program of study where you're talking about, as we say in the QAA guidance, as opposed to being able to do, is significantly different. Being able to do, relies on that sort of natural ability to, we called it yesterday a symphony, of bringing things together intuitively and making them work together. So that will be your thinking, that will be your behavioural approaches, that will be the whole package coming together. That doesn't happen when you can only talk about something.
Yeah, and it goes beyond the content knowledge. It's those other skills that are being picked up in addition to the studies, the actual content knowledge itself.
And then there's that actual moment of timing when it's right for all of that to, even if you've got it, for it to actually happen in someone's life. And
we all get timing wrong, and learning from that, having the experience of that. Unless that's in your educational experience, where have you had the chance to address that?
Yeah. So it's like it's a constant source of frustration for me, because I wish, not just for our area, but I wish that all education was premised on transformational learning. And it seems to be the forces that are sort of creating trends in higher education and at lower levels are about how do we get these students in. So our recruitment needs to be good. How do we get them through so that our retention remains strong? And how do we just keep repeating that process? Less so about saying, how do we actually know that the students who have left are fundamentally different in the way they understand themselves and the world they live in?
And there's another tension here, Colin, and that tension is to do with what we might call quality assurance or quality enhancement. And that's the students' perspectives when they're on the course of doing the programme study. What do they think? What's their feedback? Whereas to us, in our domain, a lot of it is, what's their feedback afterwards? What have they got to say 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line.
Yep.
And in many ways, we feel that's more important than what they say today about their course.
How they've actually been able to apply it and reflect on it, what they've really gained from it. And of course they feed back into the process as well, like our alumni are instrumental in feeding back into the process. But picking up on one of the elements that you mentioned there, Col, like transformational learning for all learners, not just those that are undertaking enterprise and entrepreneurship courses or those that are described with those titles. Enterprise education is good teaching. It's good pedagogy, it's good pedagogy, andragogy. It's bringing in the different elements, and it's good.
Those various strands, isn't it? And giving a more holistic experience for the learner. And that transformation, we've got a real issue actually when we talk about standardization. I've been talking about that a lot lately. That if you start from a standard and you move to a standard, what about the context of that individual learner? Where's their starting point? All too often we look at where our starting point is with our content that we're going to deliver. Whereas from the learner, if it's transformational, transformed from what? It's going to be different. Yeah,
what is that real distance travelled? And one of the other elements we were discussing this morning, Cole, was that consideration of authentic assessment.
Yep.
So in the assessment process throughout all the learning is making it authentic. And you were coming up with a really interesting concept, really, in that being the second assessor. You're not the first assessor. I mean,
it sounds weird, doesn't it? But I mean, it's increasingly I'm seeing that this is, if it's authentic, if enterprise education is authentic, then the educator should never ever be the first assessor, because that assumes that they've made a judgment on something before it went and was exposed to the planned end user.
Yeah.
So if the student's doing something, a project, and they put it out there for acceptance or rejection, well then our job really is to assess their ability to understand the nature of that interaction, rather than to be a judge on it of the product service before it actually had interaction.
Yeah.
And this seems, I think, to some people to seem a little bit foreign. But if I've got 100 students and they're all going in different directions, well, there's no way I can be the expert in relation to the content and the context of that journey.
Yeah.
And all too often the question from education's point of view was that a good idea? As simple as that. Was that a good idea? Well, it's a good idea to the target audience or not. It's not necessarily a good idea to the person doing the academic evaluation. And this is something, as you say, that's so often missed. So as educators, we're trying to make sense of all of that for the learner so they can make sense of it for themselves.
Being able to reflect on
the
commentary
important
that people are getting from other experts and from all directions as well. I mean, students actually having a say in who they consider the experts in their field as well, the appropriate people to be liaising with.
And this is much really another one of my bugbears is the word reflection. They've got to write a reflection diary at the end of the course or something like that, and it's like, that's not reflection, that's more of a summary of where they're at, as opposed to using it as a tool.
It's a formative tool.
Yeah, to dig deep. Who are you? And there's this sort of ontological sense of being. Does everyone know who they are, where they are, what might be the possible journey that's in front of them, and can we use reflection in a way that's very forgiving, that it's very accommodating to everyone's idiosyncratic sort of differences, and but it actually respects them as an individual.
And there's something tied into that, Kath, Colin, and that is the fact that education is so often seen to be the person at the front who's got the answers. In this space, it's people who've got good questions. So the educator actually helps the learner by questioning their own thinking and helping them to reflect. So that's quite a shift from being the person who's actually giving the answers to being the person who's developing good questions to develop the learning.
Yeah, and it is this ability to set the questions that is infinitely harder than coming up with the answers, isn't it?
We were reminiscing last night because it's nearly 10 years ago that we did that presentation with our boots.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we were looking through those slides and whatnot. And one of the things that sort of came to me when I was sort of thinking through that was, originally back then we sort of talked about, we need to move from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side to the meddler in the middle, right? And I've talked about that elsewhere in some of the things I've written. And when I was thinking about it last night, I'm thinking, now that we've got this sort of pedagogical pedagogical, andragogical continuum to sort of think about our iterative movement backwards and forwards in, I'm thinking we most probably came at that the wrong way, because we still need to be, there's still a time when we need to be the sage on the stage, and there's still a time when we need to be the guide on the side, and there's a time when we need to be the meddler in the middle. And I think of this, my analogy I keep coming back to is a multiplex cinema. You know, if we go into Swansea in a few minutes, and that assumes that you're going to get yourself ready, Kath, but anyway, that's another issue altogether. But if we go into Swansea today and we went to the cinema, well, when we walk into the cinema, there will be movies that have already started, there will be movies that haven't started, and there will be horror genre, romance genre, and so you can't just walk in and say, everyone is here for the same reason, and they all arrived at the same time, and they're all going to leave at the same time. And I see education increasingly like that. People arrive a bit earlier in terms of their maturity, in terms of their progress through a course. They're there for a different purpose. And our challenge is to actually, almost like if you could view down from the top through the roof of that multiplex cinema, is to appreciate that there's all this diversity that's playing out in front of us, and to actually still be able to use an approach which accommodates us all of that variance and respects it.
Yeah, and there is no one size fits all, so it's working with the student, working with the learner, and because also talking then about sage on the stage, meddler in the middle, a guide on the side, is also looking at that typology of for and about and through entrepreneurship and enterprise education, because each one of those still has a part to play. It's not necessarily a hierarchy.
That's right. There. It's not a dichotomy. You're either on that side or on that side. And I think the guide that you guys had so much influence in, the QAA guide on enterprise and entrepreneurship education, I think that if you read it and you understand it, it basically says we do need to differentiate these two things, enterprise and entrepreneurship education, but we do need to appreciate how they interrelate with each other.
There's a number of ways of looking at that, Cole, but it's essentially, unless you make those kinds of distinctions, the things we were talking about assessment no longer make sense.
Yep.
If you're talking about learning environments, we've been talking about the 2 I's at the OECD, the implementation, doing what's told, knowing what the outcome's going to be, because we can predicate it. We know what's going to be the right thing for the students to do, so we guide them that way. Then we've got the innovation, where we have no idea what they're going to come up with. So the two assessments are quite different, and they tie in quite closely to this concept of enterprise education and the innovation, or entrepreneurship education, and maybe the lean startup processes, where we've got some better ideas as to how to implement some of these ideas and make things really happen.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've had a lot of common conversations over the years, and some of it goes round circles. Mostly out of frustration that institutions are sort of not as excited or as motivated or as driven to organise learning the way we may view it. And that's not just our institutions, that's institutions in general. As we
internationally.
Sort of have these conversations where we reach agreement fairly quickly, but all face the same sort of challenging issues. And one of the things that we've talked about for a long time is that we see our students' journeys as a very divergent process, but most higher education faculties see it as a convergent. You'll all start over here, and at the end of the semester there's going to be an exam question which we assume you're going to get pretty close to being able to give us the perfect answer to. And we see, well, actually, wherever it is you're starting, we expect you're going to go off even further. You're going to be even further separated in terms of your positioning to each other.
That divergent capability.
And that's very much this implement and innovation stuff that you'll be talking about at the conference next week.
If you're going to find yourself in a situation as someone who's left your educational institution, and the ballpark that you entered at the beginning of that course may have changed dramatically by the time you leave. So your ability to look around, to make connections between diverse things, actually becomes more important sometimes than your ability to remember the one or two specifics to your subject. So applying those skills and finding opportunities becomes one of the paramount things when you actually leave. So that divergency becomes very, very important in terms of opportunity recognition.
And that would link in then with picking up on Cole, your consideration of the reasonable adventurer. the concept of knowledge harvesting and just being able to use the information at hand to take forward ideas.
Well, we saw that really cool video that Andy showed us yesterday of one of his past students.
Yeah.
Current students?
Past student.
Past student. And she was really just reflecting on what she'd learnt. And a lot of it was what she'd learnt about herself. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the way she communicated that was pretty cool because it was snappy, it was short. What I really liked about it, I didn't mention to you yesterday, but what I really liked about it was that she didn't justify any of her positions. She just made her positions.
Clear.
And they were very clear with the visuals and the video tricks and whatnot she was using. So
that video call is over 2 years old.
Yeah.
And that particular individual is now working in the Manchester area. And we know exactly what she's doing, how that sort of learning has helped. And she's about to prepare another video for us to talk about that experience of education, what difference it's made to her life.
Yeah. So it's really, and you can see from the video just how much it has made to her life. And I'd like to think that I've got some students out there who are similar, but I also think I wish I'd got my students to have made something like that which helped them to internalise it and, not just hopefully make the connections further down the track. So here's a question for you both. Kath, you've got a very different background to us all. You used to be one of those banking people who's, not very nice.
I don't normally admit to that, Cole.
No, I know. But anyway, Andy obviously saved you from that at some point.
Andy took me out of the dark side, into the dark light.
Yeah, Andy used to be sort of a long-haired artist, doing all sorts of weird things.
Still am in here, Cole.
We won't discuss the nature of your projects, but we're surrounded by them, the artifacts of them, which we won't discuss on here. But and obviously, I've had a varied career across a lot of different industries. I've found the Reasonable Adventurer to be something that I can organise and communicate my thinking with my students around. Kath, I'm sure you have a particular type of graduate you're trying to sort of create. Andy, I'm sure you have. Mm-hmm. If we had this big, empty white sheet of paper and we were actually in charge of education in a broad sense, and not just purely enterprise as a subject area, but in a broad sense, what would you guys like to do to sort of put a different brush across that big open space?
It would be picking up on assessment, actually, real, authentic assessment. A number of institutions are putting into place extracurricular activities because some of the more enterprising and arguably good teaching is very difficult to measure and assess. So it would be actually picking up more on innovative assessment.
I would call it meaningful assessment. Something that helps the learner. It will help the system and the metrics, of course, but ultimately it's there to help the learner as a priority.
To make meaning of
it. I often relate this to people who train in martial arts, Cole, that you start off by learning the basics of your discipline. And then, of course, anybody who's going to... And there's a lot of respect for each other and everything in these environments, as you know. So you learn from each other in your community of practice. Maybe that's judo, maybe that's Kempo Jiu-Jitsu, whatever it is. But you only progress beyond a certain stage when you start to look at other disciplines. Now, it makes sense that anyone who's getting into an aggressive situation may meet someone who's got skills in another discipline. So if we have that thinking that in martial arts, in order to become a good Kempo Jiu-Jitsu, you have to go and learn a bit of judo. You have to look at Taekwondo, whatever that might be. It opens your mind, it has that divergency. So in terms of what I'd be doing as an educational environment, I'd be moving away from the what we were talking about earlier, this sort of convergent to a point, and ensuring that we have that opening up that's recognised, is often called interdisciplinary. We need to have that aspect back into the system.
Breaking down those silos of experience and creating opportunities for students to learn from one another a lot more.
And the educators too.
So to what extent do you think that is more of a social let it play out and find its own end, rather than a very planned and structured way of actually, if you're doing this, then you have to interact with that?
A combination, really.
Yeah. A good educator would see the way that the flow is going and manage that flow.
It's that facilitating of a learning environment, not prescribing it. And free flow can be very confusing for a number of students. Something else we were discussing yesterday was this, having sufficient scaffolding in place as well to support certain learners, and at different stages. Scaffolding and how it's built and constructed is different for each learner. So
we often use the concept of curiosity-based learning. Instead of telling people, give them scenarios and situations in which they will learn, in which they will question, in which they want to find answers for themselves. And then you facilitate that. So in terms of structuring, there's a lot of structure and scaffolding that can go under that, but it's all about getting the learner interested and developing their own ability to become a reasonable adventurer because they're interested in the world around them.
And generating that excitement. And was that the video we watched yesterday? It was really great to catch up with the graduate, because she was saying just how much she enjoyed coming into university. Every single day she was excited to come in, whether she had classes or not, wanted to learn around the topic because she was so engaged and wanted to do that. And so this blank sheet of paper that we would have, we would actually start from the point and the perspective that the students coming to learn a particular topic because they're really interested in it, and we continue with that engagement and facilitate that curiosity, the wick of learning.
So this is for one of my colleagues back in Tasmania. I was actually going to do this episode on resilience, how and creating resilience. So maybe we might just finish the show today by, I'll do that for you next week, Chris, but maybe just to give us a bit of some thinking space and for things for people to reflect on. Your thoughts on the challenge of helping people to develop resiliency?
I think a lot of it goes back to some of the earlier conversation, that my own experience of helping students to develop resilience, and if the students tell me they have developed this isn't my just saying it, is because I did things like I shifted the class around. I gave them unexpected things. It became the norm to find that work that had to be handed in 2 weeks' time actually handed in 1 week's time. And so they became used to this sort of shifting environment. Of course, there are dates you have to stick to, and of course there's planning you need to do with your fellow educators to facilitate this. But the students don't need to know the amount of planning that's actually gone into the background of that. So to them, it looks a bit haphazard, a bit unusual, but it becomes the norm. And then they become resilient because that's the way they've learned.
Yeah, and it's reflecting life, because we bring in all the external factors, like Brexit by way of example. I mean, that's had an implication for all learners. So it's bringing in those external factors. Which
is what I call the fourth attribute of the reasonable adventure, which is tolerance for ambiguity.
Absolutely.
And it's just one of those things that makes sense that students become tolerant of the fact that you can't control all these factors. And even if you think you can, someone will shift the rug.
And the word there for the agile educator, Colin. If the educator is given permission to be that agile, to bring in last night's news, to bring in recent events, to actually make the learning relevant to here and now, that's going to work. But if you're restricted by, particular ways of delivery, particular timings of delivery that are predetermined 3 or 4 years sometimes in advance for a course, that kills that ability to be agile. So going back to the other question, that agility is something I'd want to build into education.
Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you.
And it's been an absolute pleasure to participate. Thank you for the invitation.
We're all looking forward to our IEC.
Yeah,
absolutely. We look forward to meeting a lot of old friends at IEC in Liverpool, which will be a couple of days away,
and making new friends too.
And making new friends, Kath, which is always important for you.
Well, I lose so many of the old ones along the way.
I wasn't going to say anything, but... So listen, thank you very much for your contribution to the show today. And as always, we will leave you with some thoughts there to reflect upon, and we look forward to hopefully being back on time next week, hopefully before... I head back to Australia on the Thursday night. I will have sent this episode 70 from most probably the Qantas Lounge, which might be the best way for me to do it. Until then, enjoy your reflections.